say yes and no on like the hot start thing because they do have experience. It's one of those, like, the teams that have like those bumps along the way, they're typically the teams that are freshmen and sophomores and everyone's kind of finding that role and blah, blah, blah. Like I look at this team and like, us sitting here, we could scribble out a starting lineup right now, and probably put out a pretty accurate minute distribution. Like it's not that hard to envision roles, right? And you've got an older, experienced backcourt like Devontae Jones and Eli Brooks have combined to play like 200 college basketball games, between the two of them. You've got all the sophomores from last year who got invaluable experience. You have a National Player of the Year candidate who's backed up by, a 4-year player in Brandon. The biggest question is how do you kind of feed all those faces, basically, because there's a lot of guys who are very talented. But shit, you look at the schedule, I would be fairly surprised if they don't get to the first week of December, which is obviously an enormous week, undefeated. You go through Buffalo and Prairie View in DC. I think they have Seton Hall in the Gavitt games. There's that tournament out in Vegas, which is like, I think they open with UNLV and then they play Wichita or Arizona. If I'm Michigan, I'm not particularly, you're the favorite to win that. Then they, I'm sure they'll have another bye game or two here or there or whatever. And yeah, I think they're going to be like a top 3 team in the country when they get to that first week of December and they play at Carolina and Kentucky at home.
All right. Well, you heard it here first then.
Am I crazy? I don't think that's that crazy.
No, you're not crazy. Now, I was conflating because last year that's such a shortened non-conference schedule that I was thinking when I was speaking like a lot, the beginning of the Big Ten conference games. But what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And also, that's still hard. Like, everything's on paper. That's still hard.
You can shit the bed in Vegas one night and lose to Arizona, of course.
Right. I mean, I don't know. You have it's college kids. You got 25 turnovers and 100 misses. I don't know, 8 free throws. Like, I don't know. It was crazy stuff. But like last year, it was so many crazy games. I think the team was so good and so talented. But so many games where they had to be bailed out by one guy. And, what it was Mike Smith who showed up, had his Columbia days come back and flashbacks. Isaiah had to carry him for a little bit, Hunter in a few games. That's not something you always want to rely on. And that's tough to do all the time, especially you got young kids coming in, filling those roles in the wings. So I don't know. Just don't expect the same thing is what I want to tell fans. Not you, but like fans. Don't expect one guy to save the day every game. They're going to be sound offensively and defensively, but the way it's set up, the whole thing is what I want to say about is the Michigan offense. And Juwan's is free-flowing, and it's a lot of motion, like basic sets, and then it's kind of on your own. So that sets up for a interesting start about who's doing what when, and it took Michigan all year to figure it out. Last year, they were just talented enough to save a lot of games. So it sets them up for, some learning to do. Where Beeline, it was like day one. Like you didn't have to step on the court for him to be like, Stuart, you are doing this year. I'm like, dude, like let me like show myself a little bit. I've been working on stuff in the summer. It's like, no, I know who you are. Like, this is it. Which you can have success both ways, but it's very open. So I think in that sense, like it's going to take some time for them to get used to each other because you can only practice so much and know what other guys are doing.
Yeah, and there's, especially in those first few weeks, when we're going to be throwing out, big takes based on 1, 2, 3 games, whatever.
Yeah,
but
blew out
you just think about how much better Mike Smith was in ball screens at the end of the year versus the first couple of weeks. I mean, it's night and day. If you watched the first game versus NCAA tournament games, it's a different player because it's just growing into that role and getting a feel for playing that way, getting a feel like, you can speak to this far more than I can, but when you're coming out of those ball screens, just having the familiarity with your teammates of guys' tendencies and how they move and all of these things, and just getting that kind of yin and yang going, that takes time. So one of my, people that I've talked to in the preseason has been like, you watch Devontae, you kind of see various versions of him at Coastal. Can he kind of be that guy who is really head on a swivel, making good decisions out of those ball screens and keeping that kind of offensive continuity that everyone's kind of really grown very comfortable with watching under Juwan, right? Going from Xavier to Mike Smith. Like, it looks a lot easier than it is because of those two guys and what they did. Can Devontae step in and replicate those things? Because I didn't think Mike Smith was going to. When I was talking last year, I'm like, this dude from Columbia, he's jacking shots all over the place. Like, he's not going to be, and he's the size of a 13-year-old. Like, this is not going to work. And I couldn't have been more wrong. So I'm like, all in. I'm like, Devontae Jones, if the staff says that he can do it, then he can do it. So, but they are really high on his ability to, as a willing passer, and as someone who kind of wants to be that, that conductor type guy in the backcourt.
Yeah, and and
he's a better defender than Mike.
Yeah, you hit the nail, or hit the head on the nail with role. And like, talent is a must, but you get a guy like Mike who comes in, he has a talent, he can shoot it 19 times if you really want him to, and he gets in there and it's the first few weeks and there's so much talent around him that he's running a ball screen. He's like, I don't know what to do because I can't shoot it because it's probably not the right play because there's so much talent. I want to fit in. I don't know where to go with it. Like, it's overwhelming. It's not that he's not good enough. It's that you have to get comfortable in that role, and that takes time. And luckily, they had the guys around them to keep winning without that, and he, developed into that role. But it's far less talent and far more comfort in the mental side of everything. And
right.
It just depends on who the player is. Like, Devontae could be more like Sean D and step in and be like, I got this. Like, this is mine. This is what I do. I know nothing else. Or he could be a little more cerebral like Mike. You just don't know what's going to happen until they step in that court and get tested. You can come out and blow out Toledo and like, fine, cool. Like, he can get 8 assists and that mean nothing. And, until they get tested, it'll be interesting to see. But,
I mean, I will say, especially like those early tests, like you talk about getting bailed out, like, end of the day, those games where, the threes aren't falling or whatever, the inevitable games of November, right, that everyone has seen, like, well, you do have maybe the best center in the country who's going to just get buckets, so you do have that bailout guy because, who were the teams that defended Hunter well last year? It's all the teams in the back half of the schedule. We played him for a second time and all of his tendencies and stuff like that. Well, these teams that he's going to be playing now in November of next year will not have seen him. They're going to try to, obviously attack the tendencies from last year, but considering what he's probably doing this offseason, he's going to be a much more evolved player. He's going to dominate, I would think, early on. But for me, like one more, like an overarching thought, I do feel like Eli coming back is probably the most overlooked, undervalued, like roster move in the Big Ten this offseason. Like, nobody talks about it. Nobody seems to really highlight it or care about it. But like, he is such an enormous luxury item to have of just the continuity, the smarts, the on-court coaching, just everything that he brings in terms of like a college team being good. Those experienced teams that we see make Final Fours, win national championships, like they've got dudes like Eli Brooks on their team.
Every time.
It
is, the Big Ten coaches were not happy when they read that he was coming back. I talk about this all the time in basketball, especially on the defensive end. All it takes is one guy making a mistake, and that's it. You're screwed. Especially with, 30-second shot clock, long plays, long possessions, like one guy. And if you can eliminate – Eli doesn't really make mistakes. He's not making mistakes. He's not screwing up. and you take away those chances of those mistakes happening, and you know, you don't have to put some younger guy in there or some little more inexperienced guy in that position. Yeah, it makes a world of difference that you'll never be able to quantify whatsoever. And you'll be like, oh, it feels like Eli, I feel like it's doing some good stuff, but you got to like really break down film, like a full game film, in order to appreciate what he's doing. And I will say one thing, it is the most frustrating thing in the world to be in that position. It's like, be like, hey, Stuart, what do you do best? I don't make mistakes. Like, okay, that's not basketball, buddy. Like, you're not good. I'm like, no, it's very important. I'm telling you, please listen to me. But it's awesome. Yeah, it is.
You need to have Eli on the show, and you guys talk about this. That I would like to listen to that.
I'm trying, man. I want to get him on real bad because we're in very similar spots. He's a better scorer than me. But yeah, it's very similar positions in terms of like role and responsibility and the defensive end. And yeah, so it's something.
But he's such an interesting guy. He's got like just his disposition, everything about him is just, you know, he's just older. You know, he's just an older guy. You know, and he came back for the right reasons, like that he didn't get to have like the social scene of college last year, and like those things that like bothered him, like not being able to play in front of his friends and not being able to see non-athlete people on campus, right? Yeah. Like things like that. Like he wants to, from my understanding, he wants to come back like for the more immersive college experience, and that's awesome that, you know, that the NCAA gave, you know, kids like that a chance to be able to do it, you know. So I just wanted to slip that in because all we do is shit on the NCAA, but they got that one right. So
no, they did. You know what? You know, my jaded self, I will say it's like one of those things they give concessions to, you know, so they don't have to give the real concessions. It was like, all right, you can have cream cheese in your bagel now, and they go, "We're a hero. Here's your cream cheese on your bagel." You know what I'm saying? Like, but they did. I bet that it was the right thing to do. So that was nice to see. And they didn't really pick on it.
I remember being asked at the end of last year, like, if you could get Mike Smith back for a year, Shaundy, or Eli, if you get one of the potential super seniors back for the COVID year, I'm like, without question, it's Eli. Yeah. Without question. And, you know, that's who they got back. So,
man. You can find guys who want to score or run the pick and roll, but like finding guys who 40 minutes want to do what Eli does, like that's not an easy find.
Right.